people know somewhat intuitively that it's got to be a good thing to have a good people strategy. I don't even think a lot of the time, they don't know what they mean by that.
Very good point.
Especially with maybe a first-time founder CEO. They will probably have one or two companies that they think are aspirational. So they want to kind of shoehorn everything in those, in that lane. So that can be really challenging to even unpick.
Hello and welcome to the Plumm Pod, where we talk about all things HR and mental health. I'm your host, Georgia, and founder of Access HR. On today's episode, I'm joined by Kayleigh Davies, senior people professional with an inspirational career, as we talk about the evolution of HR and a transition that we can all get on board with. Kayleigh, hello.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Thanks for having me.
We met at an event at the end of last year, and I'm really glad that we can then bring our conversation from there to in person. And for our audience who don't know you just yet, I would love if we could take it back a little bit and talk about you. And there's a question that I love to ask every single guest, which is, was HR part of the plan or did it happen by chance?
Yeah, definitely by chance. Not in my grand design. No, I studied ancient history at university.
Ooh.
Yeah, super random. So that, for the uninitiated, is Greeks and Romans, and I did a year of Latin. Hugely unsuccessful at that, but I gave it my best shot. And to be completely candid, I graduated in 2009, which was a super sucky time for people graduating. The job market was just, I thought I was going to stroll into some beautiful grad scheme and take over the world, and that just didn't happen. And I had a couple of kind of HR admin jobs, started off as a background checker at one point as well, and then following that, just kind of was HR adjacent for a long time before, becoming a little bit more firmly in the people space.
And that's actually a really lovely segue for us to talk about the evolution of HR. So you've had an extensive career in HR, as you just said, starting more junior and then progressing into the people space.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the evolution of HR from where it was potentially when you first started compared to where it is now. What's the biggest difference that you're seeing?
I think the biggest difference, I mean, there's been a huge transition if pre me, right? We go right back to kind of the 80s when you might have known of it as personnel, or you had an auntie or something that worked in personnel somewhere, and everything was very administrative. Even the compliance stuff was probably covered by legal separately, kind of back then. And then I think in the 90s, it became a bit more of a profession in a different way. So the Ulrich model came out, and that was much more thinking about the different kinds of roles that one can play within HR. And I think that was a good step forward. But there's a lot of companies still using that model. And that was created in 1996. That's actually a pretty long time ago. It doesn't feel like it to me, but that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of us are not running our businesses the way we did in the 90s, especially not tech startup. I work in AI. This was not a thing in the 90s. So, yeah.
It's definitely not moved with the times. And I completely agree. A lot of organizations are still stuck in the traditional HR approach. And I'm really happy and really welcomed the people perspective that we are seeing at the moment.
Yeah.
A grumble I have, though, is us being called people and culture.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on it as a title.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because we have this sort of then dusty feeling, traditional, reactive, big corporate HR in your power suit kind of vibe. And then big tech came along and some specific big tech companies that, really changed the game. And I kind of joke about this as being like beanbag people and culture. We went through this rebrand, and not necessarily a bad thing in all. Probably did need a rebrand, but for me, then just went way too far the other way. And I think that is something that carries on a lot today, because these companies with their beanbags and their perks and being known for all this stuff, you know, the snack wars and all of that kind of stuff, that was what people saw from the outside in. It was very novel, but it was only a piece of the puzzle. Their kind of people strategy was way bigger than that. And then people tried to emulate it without understanding the landscape and how it was actually working internally. And then in my mind, everything just became super fluffy.
I completely agree. Completely agree. And I see a lot of companies who have gone fully on the other end of the spectrum of that. And they're also now going, oh gosh, what do we actually do? We've created a culture where constructively challenging people isn't there. And they're facing a lot of challenge with that. And when I was saying that I have my grumbles with it, it's the tag of culture onto now the people team's desk as a responsibility.
Yes.
Especially because culture is about behaviors. And it's everybody's responsibility for culture in an organization. Definitely agree with our move more towards people. Culture, I can't really get on board. I do struggle with that. But I love the direction that we're going in. And I wish a lot more people got on board with that.
I think, again, there's still some companies, and I think this kind of comes back to the leadership in HR. A lot of the seniors and the most senior leaders are still in the more traditional camp, just by nature of time passing, you know. But there are people then who did that big swing on the culture side. And I think you're absolutely right to kind of throw culture as this big amorphous thing that needs to be, that is impossible to be measured. You know, you talk to a lot of people. I was at an event and the best question came up, which was, put your hand up if you think you have a great culture. Lots of people put their hands up. Leave your hand up if you can tell me why it's great.
Ooh.
Very few people in a room full of senior people could properly answer that question. And I think that is it's been another kind of issue in the people space where it's very then hard to measure what we do. And we're seen as, yes, fluffy and not commercial enough. How many times do we have that thrown at us? Not commercial enough. It's tough.
It's a battle that I think a lot of us face. And interestingly, I would love to know, could anybody give a response?
Yes. So a couple of people had really, were quite forward thinking in how they see culture. And it was such an eye-opening workshop where the people that could describe it really well knew what they meant by culture for a start. You know, lots of people said, oh, well, everyone's here is really nice, or everybody's really smart. Like all of these unhelpful things. The people who could talk about it well knew that their culture was their operating system as a business. So our culture is how we win, is how we deal with failure, is how we meet, is how we communicate. They could be really specific about what they meant, and then they could talk about what was good about it. And you can also then diagnose when things are going a little bit left, because you're all speaking the same language. It was, it's a game-changing way as well, I think, of seeing culture too.
And what makes me think straight away for the people who would say, it's a nice place to work, we all feel good, is they're still stuck in that traditional lens comparatively with the people who can give a more robust, rich answer. At which point in your career did you make that transition from traditional HR to more of the modern and progressive perspective that you have now?
I think it's been an evolution. I think the big change was from when I was working in big corporates. So I started off my life in investment banking within HR, but doing a lot of kind of project management and events, but within the HR space. So that's why I say kind of HR adjacent, because I was there, but not in an HR business partner capacity. And then I went from investment banking to big tech.
Ooh.
Which was...
That's huge.
A big change. You're really going from traditional centers of excellence, all of that stuff, to full hardcore beanbag, everything, nap pods, the works. And seeing that change, I guess, went on the journey that I'm talking about just through virtue of the places that I've worked. And not long after that, I ended up in startups. And that, again, you get there and all of the things that you thought you were supposed to do, it's like a square peg in a round hole. And your CEO or the founder will just kind of look at you. We say, we need to update our maternity policy. Do we? Why? Well, I don't know. We haven't done it in a while. It feels like we probably should. It feels like it's a good thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And yeah, you just get a crazy look because you're probably not solving the right problem. You're maybe not solving a problem at all. And I think in startups, there's so much more expectation to be driving results. Every penny counts, it's just a different way of working altogether.
Especially with investment and if they're in seed rounds.
Right.
There's a lot to consider.
Yeah.
And the compliance side again.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a lot that we can take inspiration from, especially in the tech space. It is booming right now. And I know that's predominantly where you base yourself. When we're talking about the evolution of the HR and people function, a big change is post-COVID.
Yeah. Yeah.
And predominantly what we're seeing a lot is around having a seat at the table.
Yeah.
But I don't think a lot of people know what that means.
I'd agree. Yeah.
What's your perspective on that?
I think firstly, it means different things to different people. So I think if that resonates with you, and I know it resonates with a lot of people leaders, really try and diagnose what that feels like. What does that actually mean? Is it that you don't feel heard? Is it that you don't feel you have enough information or context to do your job successfully? Do you feel that you're being underutilized, or you're doing way too much admin and you can't do anything? It just means so many different things to different people. I think step one is just figuring out what do I even want? What is my issue? Because I think it just varies wildly. And I think so many leaders feel it, but in a different way.
And those questions, I don't think a lot of people are asking.
No.
And potentially that's where we're going wrong. And I hope that people listening can start to think, right, okay, what is it?
Yeah.
What does that mean to me? Because I might physically be there at the table when there's a senior meeting. But am I really there? Am I really getting that seat that I've desired and hoped for? And a lot of people are talking about from a buzzword perspective, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think, again, sometimes maybe what you thought the seat at the table is not reality. I think sometimes people think, oh, well, if I could just get in that senior leadership team meeting, I'll finally understand how it all works. The reality is we're all just kind of making it up and doing our best. There's no big reveal that changes the way that you see things. I think you need to be kind of prepared that there's still a lot of asking questions, trying to ask better questions, ask the right questions, and figuring it out as you go. Yeah.
And being open to figuring it out.
This is right. Yeah. And open to feedback.
Absolutely. Definitely open to feedback, because we don't have all the answers. We've not lived every experience. And especially if we focus more on the tech space, it's evolving so fast. And as professionals, the best ones are the ones who are curious and constantly curious.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because, and this doesn't just go for the people space, it's kind of any senior leader in that kind of position in an industry like tech, especially in AI where I am. Best practice, or what you read about, has to just serve as inspiration, because best practice oftentimes is old practice. So bringing that to your senior leadership team is not going to go down well necessarily, or it's best practice for somebody else in their own context. And again, it's not the context that is going to work or make a meaningful impact where you are.
Yeah, completely. If we take where as a function we have been to where we are now, could you give me a few examples of the practices from a people function that you're demonstrating now?
I think probably the biggest step change is realizing that you need to figure out how the business works before you do anything else. If there is anybody, kind of even going back to that seat at the table, anybody listening who can't immediately tell you what, the 3 business goals are, okay, whatever metric you use, KPIs, OKRs, whatever. If you don't know what your business's 3 top line ambitions for the year are, you're already like, press pause, you have permission to go and find that out and get started, and then come back and start thinking about, well, how can I impact that? How can I change that? I think once you start figuring out, okay, I need to understand how our revenue model works, what are our levers for revenue, what are our levers for costs, and just figuring out that landscape internally, you change all of your thinking around what it is that you should be doing. Kind of going back to the maternity policy thing, it's like, okay, well, that's not broken. We don't need to do that. What we do need is to scale faster, because that's a really important driver for growth this year. And actually, we're too slow at onboarding, or we're too slow at dealing with poor performance, whatever it may be, when you go through your kind of diagnosis piece.
And I'm curious to know, if there is anybody who is struggling to know what the business priorities are, how can we start to build a people strategy that underpins the business strategy when the business doesn't know?
Yeah. This one's so difficult, because I think this comes up a lot. And I was at a conference and I asked a question around this, and lots of people in the room were sort of like, yeah, this is, how are we supposed to make a strategy with, the business doesn't know? And the person I asked the question to, I felt them do like a full body eye roll. It was like, this session was about HR strategy and building an HR strategy, and everyone's nodding along with me. And I thought, yeah, cool question. Yeah. Everyone agrees. Let's go. Yeah. They just sort of, and they said, well, you have, if you're dealing with a CEO or a founder CEO, they will probably listen to you, or maybe a COO, and you have a mouth, you have, your eyes, your body. Go and ask the right questions, ask lots of why questions. I think failing that, take your finance director for a coffee and ask them, probably people don't sit them down and say, walk me through the runway, talk about our burn rate, explain the burn rate to me, and start understanding that. Go to sales, understand, what their targets are for the years, what their blockers are, and work around like a lack of top line if you have to, because a lot of the time, you want to make more revenue and you want to manage your costs.
And I feel like when you ask a business, that is the response that they give. And then for us as a people function to diagnose exactly what you were saying and decide, okay, well, here are the business priorities, here are the people priorities that we're really going to focus on. I've had that personally. I've gone into businesses. I'm like, okay, what are your top 3 goals? And like, to make money.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
Yeah.
And what else?
How do you do that?
Yes.
What is your plan for that this year? And if the first person you ask doesn't give you a sensible answer, go ask somebody else. There'll be other senior leaders who are trying to figure it out too.
And I love that piece of advice, because I think a lot of us take just what the CEO is saying at face value, because we're so used to staying in that lane.
Yeah.
And one of the best things we can do is build relationships and work cross-collaboratively to get a better understanding of a business. And I think that's where we've just stayed in that traditional realm for way too long.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it as well is the people space is one of those areas where people think they can do your job.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Everybody thinks that they can do what you
full body eye roll.
Everyone thinks they can do what you do, so everyone has an opinion.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that you could do as a people leader. There's a lot of things that people think you should do as
Yeah.
a people leader. And it can be very difficult sometimes to kind of drown out the noise, because you will have someone who has listened to a podcast about how this company does things, or they've read a book and they want to implement whatever it is, then, you know, they're going to come to you. And I think you need to be really disciplined about priorities and drowning out the noise and keeping really focused and being diplomatic at the same time. Okay, that's really interesting. Like, tell me why you think that's important for us right now. Like, tell me what you think that's going to improve or change, or why you think that's an issue. You will often get a lot of good info when you have that kind of conversation.
And it comes back to asking really good questions, but also showing value as a function. A lot of companies are really open to having a solid, robust people function and strategy.
Yeah.
But a lot of people also think that they can just do it and they know the way. And it goes back to that value piece. And what a transition I'd love to see is us showing more value.
Yeah. I think even a step back from that, people know somewhat intuitively that it's got to be a good thing to have a good people strategy. I don't even think a lot of the time, they don't know what they mean by that.
Very good point.
Especially with maybe a first-time founder CEO. They will probably have one or two companies that they think are aspirational. So they want to kind of shoehorn everything in those, you know, in that lane. So that can be really challenging to even unpick. Okay, well, what do they mean by a great people strategy? What does it mean for them? And then you're absolutely right. You still have to build something that is measurable. I think we talked right at the top about the kind of journey. And even today, I still see posts around moving from being process-driven to people-driven, or process-focused to people-focused. And I think the next iteration is being results-focused.
Yes.
And you can still be people-centric and employee experience-centric. That's your kind of how, or your route to results. But if you aren't results-focused, there will always be the accusation of not being commercial enough, not, you know, making enough impact on the business. And once you start figuring out what good results mean, that will, again, change everything and help you on the leadership team too.
And most second-time founders that I speak to, and I ask the question of what is an area of the business that you wish you would have invested in, they all say they're people.
Yeah.
They all say a people function. I wish that I've got a solid, reliable infrastructure that could have really then enabled my business. You just started talking then about people experience. And I'd love to get a little bit deeper on that.
Okay.
So what role do you think people experience will have on the future of HR?
That's interesting. I think, again, I'm always sort of throwing a question at the question, but again, defining what we mean by people experience and employee experience. I think that this is a discipline now within HR. In a bigger organization, there might be someone tasked with that. And again, exactly what that team does or that person does might be different from organization to organization. I think the transition that I'm seeing, at least in the startup world, that is really interesting, is thinking about people experience as a product. And in particular, the school of thought that the employee experience or people experience is a subscription product that people subscribe month in, month out, and they opt out at some point. And I think that is such a helpful analogy. When you're thinking about what you're crafting, what you're building, it also helps you speak the language of your other business leaders. If you say, hey, I would like some budget, please, because I would like to run a targeted marketing campaign so that I can get us more leads, better qualified leads. Wonderful, right? That sounds great. Why would you not do that? That is your employer brand. You know, I would like some money for an employer brand so that I can find better candidates, better qualified candidates. And making that big shift just helps you speak the language better, and is just moving everyone in the direction of being more commercial.
And that, I think, is what so many of us are so desperate to get there. But a lot of people are just stuck in their mindset.
Yeah.
So how can we start to change our mindset to more of a people experience and employee experience?
Yeah, I think it can be really challenging because I think we get tasked with so much and we get bogged down in, I said before, the noise of someone wants to do this particular thing, or you're firefighting, or there's loads of admin that has kind of come out of nowhere. I think carving out some headspace to think about this stuff, or go and read about it, or join a community where there's people that are a little bit more progressive, just to give you that inspiration, and make just a slice of time for yourself each week to think about the direction that you want to move in. I think that is something that as people leaders, we often neglect that for ourselves, because we're always so busy and, there's so much going on and pulled in lots of different directions. But just taking a moment to think kind of forward looking and learn about these kind of newer concepts is really, really useful.
And how do you keep up with the progressive approaches?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few people that are really big in this space, and books and podcasts. So Jessica's one. If you don't know her, you probably should. Her book, Built for People, is fantastic. And then if you look up, people experience as a product, you'll definitely find a couple of different podcasts out there. Luke Omani does one. Dart Lindsley does one. There's a lot of interesting stuff out there, and it only takes a minute to kind of scratch the surface before you start connecting the dots, and then you probably, like me, go down some deep rabbit hole. But there's some really good content out there.
Amazing. And I feel with that, though, we'll see a lot of businesses seeing us more as a partner.
Yeah.
And we're also looking from a user experience and user-centric approach.
Yeah.
And I honestly do think that we'll get such better buy-in from businesses at the same time. And a lot of people who've been in UX and customer experience are then transitioning over into the people space.
Yeah.
I'm really welcoming it.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great opportunity for us.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there are a couple of people out there who think this is a little bit gimmicky.
Yep.
And maybe think it's the next beanbag thing. And I don't know, they might be right. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think, everything that we've talked about already is still just that mindset shift. Yeah. Being, customer centric and user centric is such a big change. I think one of the most powerful things about the concept is forcing you to solve the right problems, not making an assumption that I think our onboarding scores are poor or they're dipping. So I'm going to do some manager training for onboarding. Okay. And then maybe the scores get a bit better, but nothing really changes. Like going and doing some actual discovery, like a product person would with their users, and figuring out, okay, what is the actual problem, and working on the right thing to solve, and then building that solution, and then you have the impact, and then it's a lovely, flywheel to, okay, well, now the people team has more impact and it's measurable, and we did a good thing that impacts the top line or the bottom line, or
Using that example of onboarding, how would you start to diagnose and dissect rather than jumping straight to the management training, which I think a lot of us have been guilty for in the past?
Yeah. Well, as much data as you can gather. So if you do surveys, take a look at that, take a look at the trends over time, but also go and sit down with people, like collect good data, have focus groups where you can dive into things a little bit more. Still be a little bit careful of people's kind of self-reporting and asking more of those questions, and ask why, 5 times, so that you can actually get to the root of the issue. And then that will help you, like a really helpful way of thinking about one instance where this happened for me was that gut feeling of managers aren't doing a good enough job, we've got to train them. Diving into it, realized that it was actually people were finding it really confusing about where all of our knowledge was sat, and that was slowing them down. So reconfiguring that, and that's not necessarily something you would think about, right? And it's not necessarily something that someone would put in a survey necessarily, but once you sit down with people and realize, okay, Actually, what they were struggling with was where to find. The information was all over the place. So if we organize that a little bit, people ramp up faster. We can increase time to effectiveness. And in sales, that means X. There's a nice dollar amount attached to that, perhaps. And in product, this means X. And then you take that to your CEO or your leader, and you're firing on all cylinders at that point.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. I think as well, visually, that will really allow people to see, okay, here is how we can really transition. Yeah, thank you. Absolutely love that. I do only have one last question. And that question is, looking back on your career, what is one piece of advice that you would give your younger self?
I think one of the biggest shifts, and I probably touched on this a little bit, is getting outside of your lane. And that was with someone that I worked with in a past startup, where I was very much still in the kind of traditional, or like at least big corporate mindset of, but we can't do this because this is a risk. And we had this argument, and I said, my job is to eliminate the risk. And he said, no, your job is to manage the risk. And it felt like a light bulb going off. I was like, oh, I don't have to have the weight of the world on my shoulders here. I can make a suggestion, make a proposal, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the be all and end all if it is declined or if they don't see what I see. And that was quite a big shift for me, from moving from that traditional to, okay, this is startups and everything is a bit spinny plate, and we're kind of, fires are popping up and I don't have to fight every single fire. So how do I consolidate that into one piece of advice? You don't have to fight every single battle. You don't have to die on every single hill based on best practices or traditions. Like, it's okay to let things go.
And that's actually really important for us, because we're people, we try and do everything at the same time, but there's so much value in that. And equally throughout the entire conversation, the mindset shift and asking great questions, I think, is such a valuable takeaway. And the future is bright and we need to be more progressive. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Like this episode? Click here for more HR talk. And if you're just catching up, check out our previous episodes right here.